the road to Basra, there were lots of dead Iraqis.
Was there?
Yeah, there was, yeah.
Just on the roadside?
Yeah, smouldering, because...
Smouldering?
Yeah. And then an officer come to me and said, look, have you seen this? A multinational unit gathering intelligence on war criminals for the Hague Tribunal. The Serbs, basically, who were the large majority there, were killing Muslims, killing Christians, you know, and it was sectarian violence, basically. War crimes, crimes against humanity. And when I got out there, it was like undercover. And I was put in the American sector, and we got CIA guys in the team, got American SF in the team, Danish SF in the team, Italian Special Forces, all kinds of people living in this house, about 8 of us. And we went out and gathered intelligence. We were in a 2-vehicle convoy, and I was in the second vehicle with a CIA guy, and we got T-boned and run off the road straight into someone's house. Drove straight through the side of someone's house. So the CIA guy had hurt his leg and was screaming and revving the engine, and I switched the engine off, got the weapons and ran back towards about 15, 20 Serbs who were running down the road armed, like not to help us out, do you know?
Oh my goodness.
I lived in an hotel called the Alhambra. It was used as basically as the line for the mortars from Al-Qaeda. One night there was sort of some firefight, and we went out onto the balcony, and like, you know, the rounds were whizzing past literally on the balcony. So it's like, I mean, there were rocket attacks and everything on the night time. It were horrendous. Yeah. There's the Taliban firing rockets.
Yeah.
You know, on the night time.
What, you just see them in the sky?
No, they were landing, and you could hear the explosions.
Neil's
that,
like
you know,
so casual, isn't he?
Yeah, it's just rockets flying.
Rockets.
Yeah, it was just so.
They were landing.
Yeah.
As rockets do.
Yeah. It was too fast and loose, you know. They were targeted all the time. There were letters getting thrown over the perimeter wall, because we had 2 villas. And, you know, those letters were from Al-Qaeda saying, we know where you are, we know who you are, all this kind of stuff. One Sunday we'd been out, and it was like, yeah, you've got to come back straight away, come back now. So we come back, and there was a vehicle shot to pieces in the car park in the front of the villa with the tarpaulin over it and 2 dead bodies in it. Yeah.
All right, we had a dinner with Neil, and we are aware of some of what he's been up to around the world, and it is mind-blowing. The story encompasses Germany, Bosnia,
Serbia,
Algeria,
Afghanistan,
Luxembourg, Baghdad,
Oman,
and
Brazil.
I think there's about 105 countries that I've worked
Oh
in
my
and
goodness.
lived in and all kinds of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
I've been about a bit.
So many of the military stories are fascinating, action-packed, just like the police stories, just like the prison stories. And Neil, like I said at the meal, it was absolutely mind-blowing with Big Joe Egan. Shout out to Big Joe Egan for arranging this. You can check out his book and his podcast as well. All right, Neil. So, shall we go back to the mining village in South Yorkshire then,
In
1971?
Yeah, I was. That's when I was born, January 1971, January the 27th. When I came out of the hospital, and obviously the house in the mining village wasn't ready. My parents had bought it, but it wasn't ready, and I lived at my grandmother's for the first 12 months. Once the house had been refurbished, then I moved there, and that was it really. And I spent the first 16 years there. Went to school there, massive comprehensive school, more than 1,000 pupils, but sort of all from a village, so everybody knowing everybody. You know, everybody went into the same pubs and things like that. And then come 16 and a half, it's already been sort of decided and really set in stone that I would go into the army. That's, you know, my education. I never really excelled at education. So it was decided that I'd join the army, and I went to Sutton Coldfield, did the pre-select at that time, it was about 3 or 4 days, and got a date to join. And I joined as a junior soldier in September 1987. I did 6 months basic training. During that time, I boxed in the army as a junior soldier, was junior heavyweight champion. And then moved on to something called trade training. And what I did then was learnt how to lay cable, joint cable, and like telecommunications type stuff. Then from there, we went on to like driver training and then out to Germany.
Were you this big when you joined the army?
I was about I think I'm maybe 6'1". I'm just under 6'4" now. So
he wasn't like
no, I wasn't like that, and a lot slimmer, and wished I was now, but unfortunately the age has caught up with me. So that's how it is. But yeah, I went out to Germany and met a lot of interesting blokes, you know. But it just there was something lacking, and I come across a guy called Terry who's far more senior than me. He introduced me to a Welsh guy who we'd been in a previous unit with, and they'd been SAS signallers, and it was rather impressive and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, you know, this is where I want to be type thing. I've got to get there.
What is an SAS signaller?
So the SAS go around the world doing operations, as you're probably aware of, and they have a select group of people called the SS signallers, Special Forces communicators now, and they travel with them, and they go on the ground with them, they go in the buildings with them, and all kinds of stuff, and they do the signalling for the team commander, and that's what they do, and that's what I did. So. Prior to that, I hung about in Germany for 4 years, sort of. But there was massive drinking culture. I never really, of course, I did the drinking, but I never really took to it. I was never that good at it. So I'd got my mind set on this SS signaller thing. But my dad went to school with a guy called Lawrence Gallagher, and Lawrence Gallagher was in the SAS, and he died in the Falklands. He died in an helicopter crash where 22 guys died. So he was one of them. So I knew I had this sort of background knowledge about what went on and that type of thing, and how sort of special it was, and that's where I ended up in around about 92.
One of me and Wildman's friends tried to get into the SAS. This was a very tough guy.
Yeah.
And he didn't pass.
Right.
It's not easy, is it?
No.
Can you what you got to do?
So there's a lot of aptitude tests, a lot of physical tests, a lot of training once you've done the physical tests.
How intense is this training?
Very.
Yeah. Describe what you had to do.
I mean, listen, I was never the fastest, but what I did have was the determination.
Was it like that programme?
Yeah.
What was it? Where you train, you got to compete and do SAS training.
I can't remember the name of it, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's very similar. Like,
we had a guest who was on that.
Did you?
Michael Maisie. He's been voted out the most handsome ever guest.
Bring him on.
So yeah, I think I remember one of them guys, Bill Billingham. I do remember him. You know, he was around about the same time as me, kicking about. And obviously gone on to do books and so on and so forth, you know, and all credit to him, you know, and he's a great guy, to be fair. The others I'm not familiar with. But it was intense. I mean, it took me 3 times to pass, so...
3 times?
Yeah, I went on the first one, failed towards the back end, stayed there, went on the second one, failed towards the back end on the same event, and then did it a 3rd time and then managed to scrape through. So
I'm surprised you weren't pissed off by doing it the first time.
Yeah, I mean,
so have you got to go on the water and things? Have you got to like swim through things?
No, there's a swimming test, but it's not. There's not like this. I don't know, underwater assault course or anything like that. There's not. But there is obviously the physical test is all more or less running with weight on your back and a rifle over the Brecon Beacons and back and forth and checkpoint this, checkpoint that, and there's always somebody there to do the timings and make sure that you're within the times. And if you're not, it's just a case, you know, thank you very much, and off you go, you know, and that's it.
What was your first exposure to weapons?
At 16 when I joined the army. And then obviously it was the self-loading rifle then, the SLR. So yeah, that was it really. I'd seen an air rifle and an air pistol and things like that, but I'd never owned one. My parents wouldn't allow that, So
did you go on a range or something? Take us through your first day of shooting.
There's a lot of dry weapon training before you go on the range and do live firing.
What's the dry weapon?
So that's basically you're in a classroom and you learn the characteristics of a weapon, the weight, its calibre and so on and so forth, what it can do, what it can't do, how to use it, and you go through probably 11 lessons or something like that, and you just keep doing those 11 lessons and keep doing, and these drills for load, unload, in the event of a stoppage and the weapon stops firing, you do this, you do that, you do the other, and you just keep going through those all the time, and then eventually you go down the range, and obviously there's one conducting officer, but there's tons of safety staff, and everybody's, because you're just young lads, so you're all managed extremely closely, and that's where it starts. And then you learn these things called marksmanship principles, which is the 4 type of elements of shooting basically, and how to create a good shot, how to be a good shot. And that's it really, and it's that SLR was like a beast of a rifle, it was a 7.62 caliber, which very powerful gun, and then later on we changed to, I think I got an SMG, a submachine gun or something like that, which was my trade weapon, and I went to because I went to the Gulf War when I was 19, and
I've just seen that.
That's the weapon I took.
Shooting the first time, feeling that power.
Yeah, it's because you've never experienced anything like that, unless probably, I don't know, say people were maybe brought up in South Africa or somewhere where weapons are prevalent in the home. There's not that here, is there?
No.
So large caliber rifles are not prevalent here in homes. So yeah, it was. I had a cousin who was in the army at the time. My uncle had been in the Royal Marines. My father had been in the RAF. So all them would have fired weapons, do you know what I mean? But obviously it's not the same. Somebody explaining something to you and actually doing it are two different things. So, of course. Yeah, but it was an exciting thing, nothing to be frightened or worried about, But you have got to be safe, obviously, because it's a very unforgiving thing.
So Germany was all beer festivals, was it then, before the action?
It was predominantly
the whole...
Oktoberfest with the
Yes.
ties and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So yeah, there was all that kind of stuff, and there was a lot of drinking. There was a big drinking culture. Not much necessarily in the way of fitness or soldiering. That all seemed to be a backseat thing, and I just thought I could really do with something a bit better than this, So no disrespect to anybody, I just wanted more from my time. The Gulf War came along. I volunteered. I was 19.
That was the Gulf War one with Saddam Hussein.
That's it. Yeah. So we went out there.
Where did you end up?
I ended up in a place in Saudi Arabia to start off with. That's where we mounted up and got in vehicles and went into the desert. And then really at 19, obviously I didn't have any rank or anything. You went to briefings, but you didn't really have a clue of where you were, or people just showing you big maps of desert with sweeping arrows and saying you're located here. It's all
was the mission to liberate Kuwait? Was that it?
Yes, yeah. But we drove through the road to Basra. We went up from Saudi into Kuwait, skirted round into the bottom of Iraq, and then back down sort of the road to Basra. And at one point we lived we camped, set up base in an area where the Republican Guard had been, and that was quite interesting because by that time the war was coming to an end. We were just hanging about in the desert type thing, tons of us, and so you could go around these places where the Republican Guard had been. We were throwing grenades, firing mortars, doing all kinds of stuff, unregulated, and unchecked, and that were all right,
Did you come across casualties?
Seeing casualties.
Seeing casualties for the first time. What was that like?
I was just like the road to Basra. There were lots of dead Iraqis.
Was that?
Yeah, there was. Yeah,
Just on the roadside?
Yeah, smouldering because
Smouldering?
Yeah, because the A10 tank busters had been there and basically done the damage, and we were pushing through behind the A10 tank busters. You know, the aircraft. So
Was it men, women, children?
no, Iraqi soldiers, men.
Just soldiers.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, and you could collect weapons. You couldn't bring them home, obviously, but you could pick anything up, and you know.
Does that affect you though? Seeing people smouldering, corpses smouldering.
I've heard there's a horrible smell.
Yeah, I mean, you don't forget the smell, but as for the sights and that, I think probably touch wood, I think I've come away relatively unscathed. You know, I've never had anybody, you know, say, oh, you ought to consider speaking to somebody about this or speaking to somebody about that. So I think I'm relatively unscathed, you know. And I've seen quite a bit and done quite a bit. So I think I'm just one of those who's been robust enough to not buckle, I think.
Just got to get on with it, like being a doctor, isn't it? And
I mean, I've got friends who've got PSD from one reason or another. You know, and I think it affects people in different ways. And I think probably maybe the same as other things in life, you've got a tolerance, and once you get beyond that tolerance, that's when you need help. But maybe I haven't reached that yet, thank God, you know.
Oh, thank God.
So you're flushing out the Iraqis then, and was that quite an easy mission, that one? Because the tide had already turned.
Yeah, I think we'd been there since I got there sort of 3rd of January. The war started on the 16th of January 1991. And really, there was... I didn't get involved in any fighting then. That had already been done by the time we got there, you know, and these tank busters had done the damage, and, you know, but like I said, vehicles were still smouldering, and you could go about these vehicles. There was no problem. I mean, at one time, I always remember we were climbing in and out of tanks looking for, I don't know, whatever. And I come across a red leather-bound book with a photograph of Saddam and loads of Arabic writing right to left, you know, right from right to left. And at 19, you think, I just threw it away. But looking back, I really should have kept it and had it translated, because it was probably the Tank Commander's Journal. And it was just an interest.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But at 19, you don't think like that. So I think I was just very young, very naive. But obviously, I was quickly coming out of the naivety thing, because I was getting exposed to these types of things. And once I'd come back, I was very much like, I volunteered. I knew that was the right thing to do. And I thought, to progress, you've got to be there. You can't sit here and when everybody else is there type thing. So I'd sort of, they were relatively pleased with me, these officers, and that I'd volunteered. Now, that type of person showing some willing. So,
how long were you out there for?
I think it was about 4 or 5 months, something like that. Okay. We came back, and then you had 4 weeks leave, and it would just carry on as normal. You know.
So what was the first fighting you experienced?
The first fighting was probably in Bosnia. And by that time I'd had a lot of training. I'd been to Hereford, been in Special Forces, so I'd certainly got the knowledge of what to do when something happens, whether you come under effective enemy fire or you take casualties or whatever it is. I'd got that knowledge on, and I felt I was secure in my mind on what to do. And
so what went down in Bosnia?
When I left Hereford, I went to a mainstream Green Army unit, which was very sort of boring, really. There wasn't really much for me to do. There wasn't much for anybody to do. And we'd done these, like we'd been out to the Falklands and done a rulement tour. It's a complete waste of time, really. I'd been to Bosnia for 3 months, but never really gone out of camp. And that was just the nature of what that unit was doing at the time. And then an officer come to me and said, look, have you seen this? And it was something on what's known as Part 1 orders. So that's a regimental document that comes out every whatever, weekly or whenever they need to put one out. And at the back there was like a list of jobs that you could apply to do or whatever it was. And he showed me this thing, and it was going to be a multinational unit gathering intelligence on war criminals for the Hague Tribunal. So I said to him, well, what really do you know about it? And he says, well, I just know this, know that, and know the other. And we had this discussion, and he says, I think this is sort of your, right up your street type thing. So I sort of said, well, yeah, maybe so, but what about this, what about that? Anyway, it came about that I did put my name down, I applied, and I went on what's known as a pre-select, which was 4 or 5 days down at Defence Intelligence Security Centre. Met with these officers, did a presentation, wrote an essay, had some interviews with a panel of people, psychometric testing and all kinds of stuff, weapon testing, and they liked what they saw. And I thought, yeah, and then they said, could we call your officer and see if you're available to come back on the full course. So I said, yeah, anyway, they spoke to this major of mine, who I think was happy to get rid of me, really. So he says, yeah, he can start straight away. Mm-hmm. So I went back on this course, and sort of everything was a raving success. They liked me, I liked them, I liked what the job was. And when I got out there, it was like undercover. And I was put in the American sector, and we got CIA guys in the team, got American SF in the team, Danish SF in the team, Italian special forces, all kinds of people living in this house, about 8 of us, and we went out and gathered intelligence. And then
to set the table a bit more, what had actually happened out there for you to be out there? Was there some massacre or something?
Basically, there was war crimes. There was the Serbs, basically, who were the large majority there, were killing Muslims, killing Christians, and it was sectarian violence, basically, war crimes, crimes against humanity and all kinds of stuff. Wow. So it was like NATO had said, well, we can't have this, because NATO's like the world police, isn't it? Yeah. So they'd said, well, we can't have this, and they'd obviously mobilised and gone there. Now, in order to bring these war criminals to justice and get a hold of them, they wanted someone to gather that intelligence, so they put together this unit. And I was on that course in England with guys who went to the British sector, but it was just the way that the roll of the dice, I ended up in the American sector. So my team commander at one point was an American major called Jack, who was a great guy actually, and that was it. And we lived in an house up in the countryside. We used to get administrated out of a place called Comanche Base at Tuzla, and we were going out on these daily missions, speaking to people, and you'd get what's known as something called PIRs, which is primary information requirements, and they'd come from the general. So at that time it was General Grange, an American general, and he'd say, I need to know this. It just wouldn't come from him. It'd come from him indirectly. And he'd say, I need to know this, need to know that. You'd collect all this info. You'd go through your contacts who you were managing, and you'd say, well, I think mine can answer this question, that question, whatever it is. And then you'd make contact and you'd go speak to them and get these, in a roundabout way, because you had a cover story, and you'd sweet talk them, and then you'd offer things and all kinds of stuff.
What was your typical cover story?
So the cover story was that because things had gone wrong there was lack of housing, lack of shelter, lack of building materials. We were called land centre planning staff, and we'd come there to offer these building materials. And we had a legitimate phone number you could ring to get in touch with us and all this kind of stuff. And then we'd say, yeah, they need so much wood, so much polythene. You see these makeshift shelters with the wood and polythene, and we'd send all this kind of nonsense up there. Then we'd go up there saying, is everything all right with the wood and this? And then we'd ask about other things. And going back to your original question, but we were out there one day and we'd been told, look, things are not good. There's fighting, there's all manner of stuff. We went out there and we were in a 2-vehicle convoy, and I was in the second vehicle with a CIA guy, and we got T-boned and run off the road, and the CIA guy was driving, and we went through a perimeter wall straight like through a telegraph pylon and straight into someone's house. Drove straight through the side of someone's house. So half the vehicle was in like the living room. And
Was anyone in?
I don't know. I don't know. There's just like bricks and mortar everywhere. And when so the CIA guy had hurt his leg and was screaming and revving the engine, and I switched the engine off, got the weapons, and got out of the vehicle, and ran back towards about 15, 20 Serbs who were running down the road armed, like not to help us out, do you know?
Oh my goodness!
So we've had like a Mexican standoff, you know, and the guy who I was with in the vehicles got rid of all the sensitive items, but the vehicle was disabled. We couldn't get it out, but the vehicle was waiting for us and also providing a defensive position. So we've cross-decked all into that, and I've withdrawn from that defensive position. And then we've literally just hightailed it out of there.
So you kept them at bay until you
Yeah. You know, we've had a firefight, kept them at bay, and then like fire and manoeuvred backwards because we're just grossly outnumbered, you know. And at that point, you've just got to get gone.
That's the first time you've been fired on.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Were you shitting yourself?
Yeah. You sort of don't. It's one of those things. It's no different to being any other type of confrontation. There comes a point when you don't realise you're scared, and you are scared, but you don't realise you are anymore. And it's fight or flight. And so the initial bit at that point was to put down some fire and fight back. But obviously, you know, you're heavily outnumbered. And then it becomes like, listen, we are going after tactical withdrawal, whatever you want to call it, run away. So that's what we did.
So it's like you're on autopilot.
Yeah.
But they're spreading out, are they, and trying to get to you?
Yeah, of course.
So you've got to figure out how to keep them back?
Yeah. So I've got the Danish guy over my right-hand shoulder, sort of, but further back. And he's laying down fire, I'm laying down fire, I'm moving, he's laying down fire, I'm moving, and all this kind of stuff until I get back to them, and then we just drive off.
Were they getting any closer?
No, because
they hunkered down?
Yeah, because of the fire. So, but you know, a bullet travels fast and travels a long way. So, it was just by the grace of God, really, that nobody got injured or killed.
Did you think when you retreated, they would just jump up and
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether whether they'd run out of ammunition or whatever. I don't know. But you see, what happens in them situations is that a lot of people say, "Oh, I was involved in such an act of violence that I was physically sick." You're not physically sick at the time. It's after, when you think about it. That's when you think about feeling sick. Like
When the adrenaline's run off.
Yeah, what could have happened? Because it all could have gone wrong.
Were you thinking, how long is your ammunition going to last in case these guys keep going?
Well, I'd had the training, you know, conserve ammunition, you know, specific rates of fire, deliberate rate of fire, and so on and so forth. So I was conscious, you know, but I was firing foreign weapons at the time. It wasn't a British. I was firing an Uzi and all, you know. That belonged to a Dutch guy who was, and it was because really I'd gone out there, believe it or not. They'd sent me out there with just a pistol. I had no rifle.
Oh my goodness! I'd much rather have an Uzi.
Yeah.
I used to have an Uzi. I had an Uzi in Arizona.
Yeah. I mean, it's no good over massive distances, is it? You know, I mean, it's only any good in this type room, really. But
what about hand grenades, things like that? You didn't have access.
I didn't have anything like that.
That'd be handy, wouldn't it?
We didn't have anything like that. And that was a thing where, back at the house, the CIA guys had got thermite grenades and those were purely for the laptops that we were doing the work on. So if the house got attacked, the drill was to put all the laptops on a pile and put the thermite grenade on top and melt through everything. We got rocket launched and everything, but we didn't have them with us. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because two blokes had to stay in the house every day while the rest went out, and you took it in turns.
What happened to the CIA guy and his leg?
So we got back. The place where that happened was a place called Birchko in Bosnia Herzegovina, and it's a Serb stronghold. And on one side there was a American base called Camp McGovern, And from our house, we used to come through one side of Camp McGovern and go out the other side of Camp McGovern. So we hightailed it to Camp McGovern, got access. They knew us, we'd got the ID cards and everything to get in there. And obviously, it's like a cleaning process then and a defence mechanism, and we've drove out of the other side. We've obviously then got straight on the communications and reported it to Tuzla and the higher command, and they were like, we want you to come down here straight away. So me and the CIA guy and the others who were involved drove down there and told the tale. And then, strange thing. And then I got, it was like we're going to write, they were talking about we're going to write you up for this and write you up for that. And I think I got a letter from General at the time, General's commendation. But actually the CIA came to me because he got an handler, he got a bloke who was managing him at Tuzla Base. And he said, Bill Clinton's going to fly in. Not for this, to meet the troops. And do you want to be on that and shake hands with Bill Clinton? I said, no.
Really?
yeah. I wished I'd have done it now, you know what I mean? But at the time I was like, no, it's not for me. Do you know what I mean? So that's what happened.
And what was your next assignment after that?
So I'd come back from Bosnia, and then I think it's probably quite a sort of benign time where I was due to get promoted to sergeant. Things were going relatively well at that point. I was very young, and I think I was a sergeant around about 26, 27 years old. And I think then they called me up. I said they called me up. It was a staff sergeant called me up and said, I was at home at the time. We'd got an house, me and my son's mother, and this is before my son was born. But we'd got an house. Near where I originally come from. They phoned up the house and said, there's a promotional course. You've come off the promotion board to be a sergeant. Do you want to go straight on this course? Well, this was on like a Friday afternoon. I said, when does the course start? They said, Sunday. I said, wow. And it's like a career make or break type thing. So, but anyway, as is what I do, I said, yeah, go on then, put my name down. So they sent a signal and said, yeah, he'll be there. So I was there on the Sunday. And so I got through that bit. Come back as then a sergeant to the same unit. And then I was due to be posted. So they were due to send me on my way somewhere else to do a job somewhere else, wherever that may be. And you fill out these things known as, it's like an army form number, but it's called, behind the scenes, they call it a dream sheet because it's literally just dreams. So you might fill in like, you want Tenerife as the light entertainments manager or whatever. But you definitely won't get that. So I think they'd offered me something like Northern Ireland as military transport senior non-commissioned officer, something like that. Well, I knew the guy who was doing that job. I'd been in training with him, a guy called Andy. So I rung him up and said, we hadn't talked, but obviously been in training as young lads. So I said, look, he's like, oh, don't bother, it's rubbish. Which I'd had a good idea it was anyway. But so what happened is then, when I was on that promotional course to be a sergeant, the guy who was in charge of that had said, would you be interested in coming back and being an instructor? And I thought, rather than me get something that I don't want, I'm better off taking something that I'm sort of in charge of, So I rung him up and I said, look, do you remember when you said? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm saying yeah. So he says, okay, what you've got to do now then is get your officer to write to us expressing your interest, and we'll write back and say we accept that, and we're, all this kind of stuff. And that's what happened. And I went there and I became a sergeant instructor on this promotional course for people who are, going to be sergeants and wanting to remain sergeants, that type of thing. And I took these guys through this 6-week course, doing fitness, tactics, and so on and so forth. And I'd have like anywhere between 12 and 15 guys to myself, and somebody else. There'd be other guys like me doing the same with us, and all run on the same curriculum. And I think I did about 3 or 4 courses. I lasted about a year. It weren't really for me, to be honest with you. And there was a situation towards the back end where I failed someone, and the training officer came and said to me, look, you've written this, you've written that on this report. His commanding officer will see that. I said, and so he should.
How did he fail?
Yeah, his performance was poor, And what he said to me was, so I give a demonstration of how to clear a wood of the enemy. And then what you do is you take them round, you give a demonstration, explain it, demonstrate it, they imitate and practice and so on and so forth.
How do you clear the wood of an enemy?
So basically you put out what's known as like cut-offs. So outside the wood, you would put off a cut-off at the far end, a cut-off at this end.
What's a cut-off?
With a machine gun. And they would look down they would look down the wood line and wait for anybody to exit, the enemy to exit, to run away from the wood. You would line up in extended line and you'd advance through that wood and flush them out, essentially.
Yes.
Or you might come across them and have a firefight with them. And that's what essentially happens. I did all that, showed them, and then what you do is you do that in the morning. You take them somewhere else to do something else, then you bring them back and then you test one of them on that. That's his exam type thing. Anyway, he did it all wrong, and I said, "You do know where we are, don't you?" So he's like, "Yeah." I said, "Show me on the map." So he, picks up a blade of grass and points with the shows me right there. I said, "Have you been here before?" He said, "Yeah, I was here this morning with you." I said, "Good." I said, "So why didn't you just do it like I did it?" He said, "Oh, when it comes to tactics, I'm a fool." I said, "Oh, right." I said, "Well,
You're in the wrong job.
I said, watch it. Because essentially, you see, if I pass people through me to go back to that unit, I'm saying, listen, you're good enough to take a 17, 18, 19-year-old like I was out to somewhere, and look after them. Well, what if you don't and something goes wrong? And, I mean, inevitably things do go wrong, obviously, but, to knowingly pass somebody through you who's not good enough to take somebody's child out to... So I felt a bit aggrieved with that kind of response. And I wrote, the last sort of 2 lines I wrote by his own admission, "This man is a fool." And anyway, the training officer said to me, "Look, you really can't write that." I said, but he said it, I just wrote it. I'm not making it up. And I sort of realised then that this perhaps not the place for me, type thing. And it weren't long after that, I think a friend of mine from ex-Hereford lad had phoned up the house, spoke to my partner and said, "Is Neil available?" All this, and she knew these names. They were familiar in the household. These names who I'd been mates with. "We're working in Algeria. Why don't you come to Algeria and work with us?" So I went. That was on a Friday. I went back to the army on the Monday, and I went to see the admin officer, and I said, "I'd like to PVR, which is like payment for voluntary release or something like that." So he's like, "Oh, let me have a look. How old are you? When's your date of birth? When's your promotion date? How senior are you?" He said, "Oh, look what's happened here. On Friday, it came out that you're now protected. You can't do that." So I was like, "Friday?" I said, I came here on Friday. Where were you?" He said, "Oh, I was playing regimental cricket." I said, "Well, you'll have to backdate it then." So which was a lie, but he backdated it, and I jumped in, and they asked for 250 quid. I paid it on the Monday, and I left on the Thursday night, and that was the end of it. And I'd done 4 days short, 12 years. Wow! So so it was as quick as that, but prior to that, I was like a career man. I was going to go all the way and all this, and I'd had very positive feedback, and you can be a major and all this kind of stuff. And I did fancy that, but I was growing disillusioned, and I thought the best thing is that if that's the way you feel, is get out of it, and that's what I did.
So what was going down in Algeria?
Mates of mine were doing security and risk consultancy work on desert oil rigs, and the company was Halliburton and Schlumberger and all these type of oil, petrochemical type of companies.
They under attack from people and bandits and stuff.
Yeah. There is a threat out in the desert, because you're just miles away from anywhere. So, and I think what happens is, or what I know to happen is that They go to the insurance company, the underwriters, and say, look, we've got X Special Forces guys doing our security risk stuff, this, that and the other. And the premium gets reduced. They don't actually see the benefits of the reduction, but what they do get is an asset, which is you giving 24/7 advice. That's how it pays to have it, really, and it satisfies a lot of boxes, ticks in boxes.
How long were you out there for?
I think I did 5 months in the first stint. But they never struck oil, so so that came to an end. But by that time, that was all right because I had the money out of it, you see. So and I was well on my way. So I felt as though I'd swum the channel there, I then came back from there.
You clicked up with Alan Sugar.
Yeah.
I was the original apprentice, actually. Yeah. I came back from there and I couldn't. I'll tell you what happened is there'd been a move. By these friends of mine who'd been doing this security and risk consultancy, communications and all kinds of stuff in the desert. They'd then gone on to do Microsoft systems certified engineer jobs, which you could pay for, because obviously they'd got the money now, so they were paying for these big qualifications and getting these jobs at, sort of whatever it were a day, big money compared to being in the army. So obviously I was like a little bit behind them in all this, but following on. So they was like, oh, you've got to go to Coventry and you've got to go to see this company called wherever it was. And you sort of do this residential course. It costs about 7,000 quid. And you get this qualification. And then you can get this job doing this, that, the other. Well, that was true. I went there and did the 7-week thing. And
How techie are you?
Not at all.
Really?
No, my son's good.
Yeah.
So like if I wanted anything doing, I'd just ask him. Do you know what I mean? But yeah. So I did that, and then I worked for a company called Vigeland as a software engineer, and it was doing antivirus stuff. And Vigeland was owned by Alan Sugar. So I always joke with everybody I was the first apprentice. They said, "What really were you?" Oh yeah. So
Next up is Luxembourg.
Hey.
Yeah, Luxembourg was a job where a friend of mine, ex-military guy, he was actually my sergeant in basic training, and I become friends with him. He was a great guy, and he was out in Luxembourg working with these lads, and from down south, and they were out there doing all manner of stuff, left, right, and centre. Some of it I'm sure was less than whatever. But anyway, they rung up saying we'd like someone to come and streamline the long distance stuff, because they were doing stuff in vehicles, long distance, cash in transit, and so on and so forth. They said to me, would that be your type of thing? I said, it would. But now, obviously, in this phone call, I was aware that there were certain things being held back because it was over the phone. So I said, look, would you do me a favour? Would you let me come out there? Would you let me look at the job and make a decision in 3 to 4 days' time? So they were like, yeah, no problem, come out. We're going to pay you this much, pay you that much. And to be honest with you, they were complete gentlemen, and they stuck to the word, and there was no fun and games whatsoever. And I stayed for 4 months, and they paid me, and it was probably one of the best jobs I've ever had, and they were great guys, and I'm still in touch with them today. Yeah. You know what I mean? It was fantastic, yeah. But as with all good things, it comes to an end.
And then you leave and go to Afghanistan.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'd come back from Luxembourg, and I'd done financially. I'd done quite well out of that, but obviously it's the same with everything. There's no time to sort of sit back and, there might have been a week in Tenerife here or there or whatever it was on holiday, but generally it was what am I going to do now? Afghanistan had started. People were ringing and saying, "Do you fancy it? This, that, the other." And I said, yeah. And I went to London, I went to Stratton Street in Mayfair, went to some offices there above Langan's Brasserie, had an interview with some ex-army officer, and it was like, when do you think you can go? And I said, I'm good to go today. I've got the bag, everything with me. They gave me this navy blue Gore-Tex jacket, and me and 2 other lads, navy blue Gore-Tex coat apiece, and they said, here's the tickets, get your sends off to Heathrow. And so we went out there via Baku in Azerbaijan, and that was around about the time when England, I remember watching England win the World Cup there, 2000, I thought it was 2003, probably late on in 2003. Did about 10, 11 weeks, the first stint.
So I was trying to think then, did they win the World Cup that year?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. It was Wilkinson doing the.
No.
Is it Wilkinson doing the kicking? You remember he did the kick and that secured the win. I think it was. And
Christ, is that long ago?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So and that was there to do the security for the Loya Jirga, which was the writing of the Constitution with Karzai. And all that kind of, so I seen Karzai, I seen General Dostum, all these big hitters, 500 delegates come to this place, and I'd seen them day in, day out. I met Karzai, I met Dostum, and tons of others, and then that sort of right into there was an interesting part there as well when they were writing the Constitution. I don't know if you remember it, and it was televised quite widely internationally. A woman called Malala Joya, an Afghan woman, stood up and was very, very outspoken against certain members of the delegation, calling them bandits, thieves, and all manner of stuff. Well, as you can imagine, that is not the done thing in that country.
Lead balloon.
Yeah, women don't stand up and say them things, and they're not outspoken. They're seen but not heard, and very rarely seen actually. So she was under death threats immediately, and they gave me the job of being her bodyguard for the next 72 hours. so
how on earth did that go down?
Yeah, so as always, I was like, yeah, all right, we'll see what we can do. And anyway, she stayed on the Loya Jirga site for the next 72 hours. And then I'm pretty certain there was somebody big hitting from America there, pulling the strings. I never met them, I never knew them, I never knew who they were. But there was definitely somebody dictating the pace of the Loya Jirga with Karzai, and you know what I mean, telling him what to do, how to do it, and how things would go, and what and sort of giving direction in the background, dictating the pace, and
like the CIA.
I would expect so, yeah. And obviously, I'd witnessed that firsthand before, so that's why I say that now, is that there was definitely somebody doing that. I never met them, but I used to deal with a black guy who was definitely coming with information from well above his position, and I suspect it was somebody from the CIA, saying this is what's going to happen because we're paying, that type of thing. And then it was said, can you get Malala Joya ready and get her out here at sort of 10 o'clock at night, and this, that, and the other. We got her ready, and she was whisked away and took, up to the airfield, taken away in a helicopter. And the next thing I knew is she were in America. So, yeah, green card and and all that kind of stuff. So that's, yeah. But she was a really nice person. I had chats with her and all kinds of stuff. And she says, I knew I was destined for this. And she's a really good person, but she stood up and, to talk about fearless, Wow.
How much of a threat would you say out of 1 to 10 was she?
Was she under?
Yeah.
Probably 9. Yeah,
really?
10. Yeah. Wow. Things like that, you in them places, you can go missing. No two ways about it. Nobody bats an eyelid, so, and you're just dealing with. For example, I'm not saying General Dostum would have done it, but he had his own army, his own tanks in Mazar-e Sharif. It was his fiefdom, That's what it was. He's widely regarded as the man who did the heroin out of Afghanistan, £1 million a week and all this kind of stuff, as I understand it, So, yeah, if he was to say, give the word, I'm sure it would be done.
What happened at the voter registration project in Jalalabad?
Voter registration, that was the project after, where this was now Karzai's here, and we're going to have this vote to make sure he stays. That's what that was about. And
No puppet government there, folks.
so they'd sent me up to Jalalabad, which is on the border with, or roughly on the border with Pakistan. And the border crossing there is called Torkham border. Jalalabad is where Bin Laden's family had lived, all that kind of stuff. So we went up there, and we were really starting to instigate this. There's going to be this here, that here, voter registration, this, and monitor and all this kind of stuff, and give ground truth, and feed it back. And the first thing is we went to we were invited to the Pakistan sort of consulate building in Jalalabad, where the guy says, the Pakistan official says, if you've got the dollars, you can have the Pakistan passport. So we were buying Pakistan passports because obviously we were that far away from Kabul that going across the Torkham border, if anything went wrong, became a viable option for us for running, for escaping evasion and running away. So that's what happened there. So we went there. We did that. I mean, there were rocket attacks and everything on the night time. It were horrendous. Yeah. There's the Taliban firing rockets. On the night time.
What, you just see them in the sky?
No, they were landing, and you could hear the explosions.
Neil's
and that,
like so casual, isn't he?
Yeah, it's just rockets flying.
Rockets.
Yeah, it was just so.
They were landing.
Yeah.
As rockets do.
Yeah, and I thought to
Sounds
myself,
like fireworks.
I mean, they're a bit bigger than fireworks, but yeah,
They kill people.
So it was like we lived in this guest house, and actually we'd been put together with this driver, right? And one of the things is we had to go and get like a J.R. Hartley fishing type jacket that they all wear over the shalwar kameez thing, the long shirt. They all wear these, all the Afghans do, and they wear this hat with a rim right called pakul and all this kind of stuff. So we were down the market buying all this type of stuff, trying to fit in. And I've turned around because there's somebody following us, right? And I'm like, what on earth do you want, type thing. And I got quite aggressive with this fella, saying like, if you don't get yourself off, like, I'll snap you in half, type thing. So then this guy I was with called Andy says, well, what's the matter? So I says, this guy following us around, all the time. He says, of course he's the driver, right? But all I'd seen is the back of his head. So I'd never seen his face. So I was thinking, who on earth is this following us around all the time, and anyway. But so I did about 8 weeks there, and I thought, this is not for me. We'd moved accommodation a couple of times. Some lads had come to join us, and they'd been farmed out to the different areas. And then when I left, 2 of those lads, they got shot, by the Taliban.
Wow.
And killed. And
What were the circumstances?
I think they'd been up by the border. They'd been living there, and everything was sort of all right. And I think they'd gone to have a meeting with it, like supposedly like a tribal elder or whatever, and get ground truth on what the situation was. And as they come back on foot through the woods, they got shot in the back by Taliban.
Wow.
And that's as I understand it, And I, to be honest with you, I was just glad to be out of it, There were all manner of stuff going on there where they were saying, we don't want you to have weapons.
Well done.
Well, yeah. My policy was up there we'd got this float of cash, and we hired weapons and wrote down on the receipts that it was for something else, for food and all kinds of stuff, and bottled water. But ultimately I hired weapons because it's one thing getting caught out and not having a weapon. If you've got one, at least you've got the choice of whether you use it or not. And so I'd left by then, so I didn't really know the ins and outs of it. And the people who I tried to talk to were very tight-lipped about it.
I had a relative out there. They got surrounded by the Taliban, and they called in the air support. And it's when the enemy's so close to the friendly. It's
Close.
It's called a bug squash, a bug crush, or something. The bombing.
Bug crush.
It's that And anyway, they all had to hunker down, and while the bombs came down, and it was really close to them getting squashed as well.
Yeah.
A bug squash or bug crusher. I can't remember what he said it was called.
Yeah, danger close. Yeah,
Danger close.
Close, correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's that's it really. I just to be honest with you, when they started with the weapons thing and you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other, I really thought that's it for me. You know, it's time to move on. Do you know what I mean?
Surely felt like taking the piss though.
Well, it's great for somebody sat in Kabul to tell you, you know, hundreds of miles away, you can't do this out in the countryside. You can't do that. Well, yeah, but you're sat there safe, aren't you? You know, it's us who are up here not so safe.
Might as well put some glow sticks on and just run around.
Yeah. So I was a bit, so I thought that was then the time for me to move on, and that's what happened. Was I resigned. I didn't fall out with anybody, but I did resign, and I got I think I can't remember. I got an aeroplane, you know, like a small aircraft, fixed wing aircraft back, like a 6-seater thing, UN type plane. Back to Kabul, got picked up. I think I spent one night in the villa in the centre of Kabul with the rest of the lads who were down there. And the following day, I was flown out. And,
this is interesting that you ended up as a Baghdad as a security and risk consultant for Reuters. Because wasn't it the Assange video that Reuters journalists got friendly fire? No, they got assassinated, didn't they, by the helicopters? Yeah. Collateral, what's it called? Collateral murder, collateral damage.
I'll tell you what that was. That was the guy. It wasn't by if it's the
wasn't it the Americans that were controlling it from?
They fired from a tank, didn't they? He spun round with a camera on his shoulder and pointed it at a tank, and the guy thought it was a rocket launcher and opened up fire. But he was a local national, not sort of a. But he was working for Reuters. You're right.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name now, but I did go there for round about 5 weeks, and then the guy who had those contracts who was providing security personnel. I went from Reuters. I went to NBC News, which was in a different part of Baghdad, and I lived in a hotel called the Alhambra. We're another 4 or 5 lads who were doing the same as me. That's what happened there. So I didn't stay at Reuters for particularly long. It was just really, I think, probably the guy who ran the company, it was his way of getting me into the system. And then I went down to CNN. I think I did about 12 months with CNN. And
what would you do for NBC News?
So NBC News, and very much the same as any other media organisation, they're looking to obviously gather the news in a timely manner and get it out there in whatever format, whether it be TV or newspaper or whatever, you know, war photography, things like that. So they would go on the ground and they would meet people, they would have fixers, they would organise interviews and all manner of stuff, you know. And so you would go with them and basically tell them what the safest practice was on the ground, movement about from A to B, timings, body armour.
So the people over, sort of the journalists over in Ukraine at the moment,
yes.
Would they have security?
Yes, and right. I've actually, during this last couple of weeks, I've been offered a position in Ukraine with Fox News.
Oh wow!
It's through a third party. It's not from Fox directly, but yeah, I've been offered that, you know. But the money's not there anymore, you know. So it doesn't, because if you know there is the risk reward thing of always. So the reward wasn't there for the risk, you see. I have actually been to Russia a couple of times, and probably I've been down towards the Crimea. I did a report in 2017 for a company that were going to fly. You know, when the Crimea got annexed, I went in 2017 for a British company that were going to fly drones for the UN, and they were going to monitor the demilitarised zone. And I went to Kiev, got on the train, and went all the way down there to Donetsk Oblast, it was called. And I stayed there for about 3 or 4 days and wrote this report on whether it was safe or not. I mean, ultimately it wasn't, but as you can imagine, as you know now. But that's what they want to do, is fly these drones, from this airfield that was close to the demilitarised zone. But in that demilitarised zone, there were Russian special forces and all manner of people cutting about in the middle of the night. So,
Where is Janusian? And it sounds like it was pretty harrowing.
Janusian was. So once I left NBC News, it was coming to an end. There was a lot of infighting and so on and so forth. And I went home, and it was like, you never got the call to come back type thing, And then I think whoever had that contract, a guy called Paul, he lost it and it went to someone else. I went to Sabre, which was predominantly all ex-SF at the time, ex-Special Forces guys. After Sabre, I went to Janusian, and I was there about, I think the first rotation was for 6 weeks. I ended up doing 7. But I knew straight away, this is like, it was too fast and loose. They were targeted all the time. You sort of, there were letters getting thrown over the perimeter wall, because we had 2 villas. And, those letters were from Al-Qaeda saying, we know where you are, we know who you are, all this kind of stuff. And, one Sunday we'd been out, and it was like, you've got to come back straight away, come back now. So we come back, and there was a vehicle shot to pieces in the car park in the front of the villa, with the tarpaulin over it and 2 dead bodies in it. And they stayed there. They stayed there for 2 or 3 days. And I was just like, this is so bad for morale. Do you know what I mean? Because if people see that and think that's how you get treated when something bad's happened. So I got there was all manner of nonsense there. To be honest with you, there were some good lads, and the problem wasn't with the good lads; it was with the management. And I just thought, this is for me. So I agreed to stay an extra week, and I did do. I got to the airport and I had my resignation already saved in an email, and literally connected to the internet and fired it straight off. And then from there I went to CNN with friends of mine who were already there. And that was a good job, went to the Saddam trial with some journalists, saw Saddam, were there the night when he
refused to wear a hood, didn't he?
Yeah. I wasn't there when he got hanged, but I was in Baghdad at the time, and somebody showed me the video straight away.
What were the locals like about it?
Somewhat pleased, but remember when Saddam was, don't get me wrong, he wielded the big stick. But they knew where they stood. They really did, And he was a nuisance to the Western world, which is probably why he had to go. He wouldn't toe the line. But there were no Al Qaeda in Iraq when Saddam were there. There were no, a lot of people say it was a good place. Who am I to judge? So. There are a lot of nightmare stories. I used to. There was a guy who worked for CNN called Hamid, and he'd been in Saddam's secret police. So I was talking to him one day, and I said, "Do you ever meet Saddam?" He said, "I met him twice." I said, "Oh, really?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "The first time I'd got a call. We want you on a checkpoint in the north of Baghdad on this main road, and you and your team and all this kind of stuff." And he said, "Look out for this car, look out for this person," and all this kind of stuff. He says, "Well, that car never came, and I never saw that person at the checkpoint. Otherwise we would have stopped him and apprehended him for whatever, and this, that, and the other." He says, "When I got home that night, they told me a car will come. You have to go to Believer's Palace, which is the palace where Saddam ran the Ba'ath Party from, and the political party, and that's where he did his business." So he says, "You take off all your watch and you leave everything valuable at home because you might not come back." So you say goodbye to everybody and you get in the car and off you go. He says, and when I got there, everybody else were there who was in my team, another 5 guys. He said, and we stood in the forecourt of Believer's Palace, and Saddam come out and he ranted and raved and slapped everybody around the face. Then they were put on the knees, hooded, with hoods on and this, that and the other. And then after about an hour, they were took the hoods off and said, right, get your sends off home type of thing. He says, and then the next time, it was the same situation. A car will come, and they went through the same rigmarole, and he gave them all $1,000.
What?
So, madness. Just, and that's what he told me, and he'd been in the secret place, like so. And to be fair, I got no reason to disbelieve him. He was very genuine about it all, and he said,
Imagine meeting Saddam Hussein.
Yeah. So
you go from that to world famous football players.
Yeah, so there was an ex-Hereford lad who was doing the security at Manchester United, and I met someone else there who he'd not been at Hereford, but he had a very successful bodyguard, ex-military guy.
Sorry, how do football players need that much security? Need SAS guys? I think how much
keep
danger?
the women off them.
Yeah,
I think some of it's the kudos factor. Do you know what I mean? Like check out my, it's a bit like my car thing.
We've gone from Saddam Hussein to these like Premiership multi-millionaire football players. Yeah.
So one of the guys who was a director of Sabre, also. That was he was a major shareholder in the security at Manchester United. And so that's how I ended up there. And I knew him from Hereford as well. So that's the connection. And then they'd phoned up and said, and at that time it was, this SIA thing, the Security Industry Authority, they were coming into force. And even though you were qualified as a bodyguard, it was a bit like, well, where did you get qualified? How did you get qualified? Who passed you? And so you had to go do this refresher. So he was running these kind of qualifications that were regulated, and I went there and said, look, could you help me out? Could you do this? Yes, no problem. And so that's how I got the license, even though I was already qualified type thing. And it's basically just check. Do you know this much, that much, the other much?
What were they like?
He's a good guy. Yeah. Oh, the footballers, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They were all right.
Can you name them?
Yeah, I had my son was about 1 at the time, and I got a nephew the same age, and I got shirts from Ronaldo. It was so the first time round, like so. Also, we did at the same time we did the pre-World Cup warm-up games for England, so I got shirts off Beckham. I was asking for 2 all the time. Do you know what I mean? One for my son, one for my nephew. John O'Shea was one. Which, I think I got 3 or 4 shirts at the, so some of them were all right. Some of them were funny,
Some of them were wankers.
Yeah. And I remember one night. I can't remember what it was. I think it was England that played. Might have been Hungary or something like in this pre-World Cup warm-up thing. And I always remember you used to have to go to the end of the tunnel, but not the pitch side, the other side where they're going to the car park. And apparently part of their contract is that you go sign autographs and things for fans and that. It's so somebody like Beckham, extremely professional and diligent. I did 45 minutes with fans and that. And he's a very affable fella, to be fair, from what I remember. Rooney the same, but you'd get others who. They'd walk past the disabled kids and that, and dearie me, I can't abide by that. I mean, people who've got literally 0 to live for, and they're moving the wheelchair with a mouth, and I couldn't see that. I thought that was so poor, and there were plenty of officials taking balls and shirts
got
off
to
and
their
go.
head.
Yeah, and certainly there were certain ones that did it and certain ones that didn't, and I just thought that's poor. That's really poor. But each to their own. Because I suppose at the end of the day, when you put your head on your pillow, you've got to live with yourself.
Yeah.
So then it's over to Ozzy Osbourne's family.
Yeah. So I'd got a mate of mine, an ex-commando lad, I think he'd been in Japan with Kelly Osbourne. She went to be a geisha girl or something, live like whatever it was for 5 weeks and get all done up like this geisha. And I think he'd had enough, to be fair. And so when the media, I think it was called Scottish Media Group, they'd phoned him up and said, look, Jack Osbourne is going to do this Mongol rally thing from Hyde Park in London by vehicle all the way to Ulaanbaatar in the capital of Mongolia. Are you up for it? He said, no, I'm not available, but I know the man who is. So I guess this phone call, you're going to get a phone call from this guy. And anyway, I thought they phoned up and I went down there. They were nice people. Got introduced to Jack. And
when you heard about it, were you like, yes, this is the best job of my life?
No, not really.
No?
I've never been like that. You know, I've always been very like, yeah, it's all right. That type. I've never, do you know, even Man United. I mean, when I got to Man United, they said to me, "Do you want to tour around? You know, just us, like, you know, around this, that, and the other." I went, "No, you're all right." And they were like, "You're the first person to ever turn us down for a." I was like, "No." I mean, I looked after the Glazers there as well. Edward and Sherry Glazer, who's the youngest son of the owner. I think it's Malcolm Glazer, and. You know, I used to sit behind Jack Charlton in the thing, but I was never ever
Never starstruck.
No, and I used to talk to Wolf McGuinness, who was after Sir Matt Busby, I think, was all that type of stuff. Nice fellas, you know, but I was never. I mean, I remember once going with Edward Glazer that opened up the mega store, or whatever it's called, at Manchester United, just for him and his wife, and he was like, "If you want anything, just put it in with mine." I was like, "No, you're all right."
What if the tour guide had have been Bill Clinton?
I'd already turned Bill down, so he probably wouldn't give me a second chance. But
from private security.
Well, we'll go through what you did with Jack Osbourne first.
Oh yeah.
Go on then.
Yeah.
So, they were going to make a 2-part series about this trip to Mongolia. And he got some of his friends, some of his cronies, you know. and so we went to, is it Welders, where his mum and dad have a place in...
I don't know, and he's in their big house. On
that's it, yeah.
Alley or something.
That's it, yeah. So it's I can't remember the name.
The dog was like shit.
Chalfont St. Peter.
Carpets.
Chalfont St. Peter is somewhere like in Berkshire.
Have you been there?
Yes.
Were there loads of dogs?
No, because they weren't sort of in residence at the time. I think they were in America, but Jack had been staying there, so that's where we went to meet him. And then he come into London, and there was like, we went for an Indian and all this kind of stuff, and there was a bit of a pre-rally party or whatever that we attended, and he introduced me to some of his pals and that. And
anyone we know?
No, there was a girl there called. I can't remember her name now, but anyway, her father was the sort of CEO of NBC News.
Mm.
Yeah, and he was quite a powerful fellow, like, you know. That was it, really. It took about 7 weeks to get there. It was a great trip, you know.
I've watched the Genghis Khan movies. What's Mongolia like these days?
It was. Some of it was because we did it in the summer, so we had really good weather all the way through.
Oh, nice.
And we drove this like expedition prepared. We were in a support vehicle, so we drove this expedition prepared Mitsubishi Warrior type thing. They had 1,000cc cars or less. That was part of the race rules or the rally rules. And it was just a great thing. I met some good people, you know, and some interesting fellas who, like, one had driven a taxi, like this black cab, and had the meter going and all that kind of stuff there.
How much was the fare at the end?
I can't remember, but it was something extortionate, you know, like, I don't know, 70-odd grand or something like that, whatever it was. So, but it was just a fun thing, and but by the end of it, I really had enough of them, because it was almost like you'd got to hold their hand all the time, and I think Jack had enough towards the end. You know, he didn't really want to get involved in stuff, and so, like, we crossed this river early one morning, and it had been quite high, the water. But I'd been talking to people, because this was a regular thing for these locals, and they was like, "Oh, if you wait, it dies down." So I was like, "Oh, right, okay." So we waited, and we got across, but they were struggling for footage. For Jack, you know. So anyway, coming behind us was a Russian military minibus, but full of women and children, and it got stuck. well, we'd got this kinetic tow rope. So I was like, look, why don't we get the kinetic tow rope out and we'll wade out and we'll fasten it up and pull. So they were saying trying to get Jack to buy into this. And he was like, well, I'll do it if Neil joins in. And I said, yeah, come on then, but it's not a TV programme about Neil, that's what it's not. But in the end, he said the water were too cold, and I was left there sort of in my underpants up to.
No.
Yeah, and I was just like, dearie me, do you know what I mean? So anyway, we pulled him out, and there was tons of applause and all this, but obviously he didn't get involved, so that was never ever used. So he missed an opportunity to show himself
look like
in
a good guy.
Yeah. And
How was Jack with the food out there?
He did as well as everybody else.
What was it you were eating?
Well, we tried everything. Do you know what I mean? Sort of, was it goat's stomach curry and all this kind of stuff? No, I mean we went to a yurt. The sort of round tent with the yak hair and all that kind of stuff, and they'd got this cauldron of fat bubbling away, and they were spooning it out. And I mean,
That's like your worst nightmare.
Oh, dearie me. I mean, you just got to have a sip. You daren't eat
So
it
you
all
tried
because they
it?
just fill it up. So you just take a sip and say that's great, and just leave it to one side. So
Was it all right?
no, no, it wasn't. No, most definitely not.
No insects on the menu?
No, I didn't see that. I tell you, the most interesting bit was everybody had got a golden eagle. Everybody.
What?
Yeah, everybody had got a golden eagle. So you'd come across these people, they just got like a juvenile golden eagle on their forearm. And I was just like, he's got a golden eagle. Do you know what I mean? You can probably only see them in the islands of Scotland here. And there's probably, I don't know, maybe 10 mating pairs, say, or something like that, to guess. But like everybody...
It's like having a dog out there.
Everybody had got these golden eagles. So it's just like, yeah, she's got a golden eagle. So it's quite... And then we went through Kazakhstan, because we went through Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, went through every stand, But in Kazakhstan, went to Almaty, and they'd organised a live kill. So they'd got the guy come out with the full wizard's kit on and everything, the proper wizard hat on, the baggy sleeves and all this kind of stuff. And he brought this eagle out, and then they put a rabbit out and sent it, and it cost $5,000 apparently. So, but it was quite fascinating to watch, 'cause, quite rare, I suppose, to see that to see it live. So it was quite privileged to see it.
So then you go to private security contract to a multi-millionaire businessman, an entrepreneur, and strike up an amazing friendship.
Yeah, so that's a guy in Leeds who his name's Jeffrey, and he invented vehicle tracking, pioneering vehicle tracking, so vehicle telematics and so on and so forth.
Oh, wow.
And he was. I obviously prior to this, I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about vehicle telematics or anything. But I got a call from some friends of mine who said, we're struggling. This, that, and the other, a sensitive issue in Leeds. Could you come and shed some light on it? So I went up there, shed some light on it, and became friends with him. And to this day, we're closest friends. So yeah, fantastic thing, And he's a great guy. Yeah.
Maritime security.
Yeah, so that came about by a guy down at Hereford who was an ex-sergeant major who I worked under, a guy called Phil. He's had his own, I think he had half of a company, and his other friend had the other half of the company, and they were out doing maritime security in the Gulf of Aden against the Somali pirates. And I'd phoned him up, spoke to a mutual friend who was the ops manager in England, and said, what if I come down and speak to you? Yeah, come down, and went down, and it's like, when can you go? So flew out there to Salalah in Oman. I did a month on the boats up and down the Gulf of Aden, stopping off in Djibouti, all manner of stuff, and then I became the ops manager and looked after the operations for him for the next 5 months. Stayed out there for 6 months, and then I came home. But that was a great thing, you know. We lived in a villa, literally 1 meter's pathway, and then onto the beach, and then the sea, and it was just.
Did you encounter any pirates?
I never saw any. No.
Yeah.
What I did nearly do was, so the ship pulls in at off the coast of Djibouti, about 32 nautical miles off the coast of Djibouti. At that time, this was sort of, these transits were new to the company. So we'd got what's known as like an agent in Djibouti, who was an ex-legionnaire called Johnny, I think. A British guy, but he's been in the French Foreign Legion. And he was going to facilitate the back and forth from the ship to land. So obviously you think, I've never met the guy. You think it's going to be a white guy on a boat and so on and so forth, and he's going to make himself known to you and all this kind of stuff. Well, lo and behold, as they're coming towards us, it's two black guys in the same boats as what the pirates use, this 18-foot skiff. So obviously I was like up for opening fire, you know, because guess what? By now our ship, which is like 330 metres long, has come to a halt. You know, so we're literally wallowing in, like, anybody can come and take us. So I was ready to start firing, you know, and then all of a sudden they came over the radio and like it's us, Mr. Johnny Sanders and all this kind of stuff like so. But that was such a strange period of time because everything was just not how you would have wanted it. So like, you're 32 nautical miles at sea, it's pitch black, there's no life vests, there's no sat-nav, there's nothing. You've just got two black lads who you've never met before, you don't know whether they're right uns or wrong uns, and we're bashing through the sea, the waves are like 6 foot, and I'm thinking, this is, if all goes wrong, what are we doing? You know, who are we calling? What are we doing? Because nobody knows we're here. And anyway, we make it to the port. 2 days later, we come back, and we're coming out early morning, and we can see in the distance this massive furrow in the sea, like froth and everything. And there's a slick on the water, an oil slick. As we get closer, it's a baleen whale that's like 3 times its normal size, and tiger sharks feeding on it.
Oh my God.
So if you cast your mind back 48 hours before, and we're bashing through, and a shark feeds at night, we're bashing through the water, and like, oh dearie me. And I was just like, that is so bad. Do you know what I mean? And then the next thing was, we speak to this Johnny. And we're like, listen, this 18-foot skiff thing's no good. Don't worry about that. I've got a proper boat coming. Well, when this proper boat came, it was like some pleasure cruiser off Lake Windermere. It had got no keel. So, you know, when something hasn't got a keel and it's on choppy water, it's just rocking from side to side. And I mean, there were tons of us with green faces and all kinds of stuff. You had to lay down and... Yeah, so anyway, that was that. But it all, you know, it were all right. We got he organised the weapons from the French Foreign Legion, these Dragunov sniper rifles, and when we got back up to Salalah, we didn't have the permissions to land with them, so we threw them in the sea. We had to ditch them in the sea, throw them in the sea, all the ammunition, everything, the sights and everything.
Otherwise, you would have ended up like the Chennai Five.
Yes,
we had one of them on here.
Yeah,
we ended up in prison in India.
Exactly. Yeah, without the permissions. So then, when we get to the port, it's like you're not supposed to have body armour either. They don't like these type of security things. So I was in the port, trying to get the body armour to stay under the water, throwing it into the water and trying to, but it kept floating because it was body armour that had been bought from SBS lads. So it's like got this flotation thing. So anyway, so you know the steps like down the side of down the side of the quay and into the water. So I was down there, sort of like 6 foot under, jamming the body armour behind the steps and trying to keep it there, so we didn't get caught. So yeah, then you go check in, you know, wet through. Everyone's like, what's he been doing? So anyway, that's what we've been doing. And I came home. Yeah, I came home after 6 months, and that was it. I'd done enough.
So from Oman to Kabul.
I love how blasé you are about everything.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing is because I think there's probably lads out there who've done plenty of them who've done the same as me, you know. So,
So modest.
well, I think, you know, I'd gone. I think I went back to Kabul after that. I think that was for the Centre for International Development, State University, New York, and I think what that is it's so the State University of New York's got a set of academics called the Centre for International Development. They bid for aid money, sometimes US aid money or whatever it is, and then they take that money to a developing country and they capacity building in one form or another. And the project that they were doing at that time was in Kabul, and it was with the Afghanistan Parliament, and they were capacity building. So they were going and teaching them really how to be an effective government and effective parliamentary and all this kind of stuff. And that's what. So I was responsible for around about, I think it was 18 expats and about 92 local nationals for their security. So I did that. Did 45 days the first time because it was more like an audit thing to do for them and see what they needed, what they didn't need, because they did have a security provider who wasn't doing what they should have been doing. So there was shortfalls and gaps in security and risk, and I highlighted those. So
it was back to working for media companies.
Yeah, at that time I met with a guy who was a friend of mine. I'd known him previously. He was working with New York Times, and he said, I think you'd fit in. Why don't you come across? I went across and we had something to eat and all that kind of stuff, coffees, teas. And then I left that previous job and started with them. But the first rotation for them was back in Baghdad. I did 4 weeks then. I think I came home, quickly turned around and went straight out to Afghanistan again. And started with the New York Times, yeah.
What does diligence investigations mean?
So diligence investigations is a company in London. It was previously in the Middle East, doing the same type of stuff as what I've just talked about, you know, Sabre and all that type of stuff. And then they come back to London and they did investigations, corporate investigations, due diligence, things like that. And they were predominantly getting their work from the Russians. Ooh. You know, so
you're able to talk about these Russians?
I think so, yeah. So they predominantly got their work through one guy who was representing one arm of a group and that group is owned by quite a very big name who's on the sanctions list. You know, probably a personal friend of Vladimir Putin's. And he was passing the work, and a lot of the work was for ENRC, the Eurasian National Resources Company, who go around and exploit developing countries for mineral wealth and so on and so forth. And it was like recovering assets, recovering money. There was tons of jobs, and I was involved in quite a few. One where a mine in Brazil had been sold with false licensing for transport and export of iron ore, and so ENRC were trying to take Zamin, an Indian company, to court over it, this, that, and the other. So, and they'd got somebody to flip and come onto their side and tell their story of how these fake licenses go. And so I was provided as a bodyguard to that person, and he was also a politically exposed person. You know, so his family had been very senior in the government in Brazil. So we travelled all around Brazil. He was very well known. His name is very, very well known. You know. Any
hairy moments?
Yeah, because so in all of this, when he flipped sides, he'd upset a lot of people in Brazil because these businesses run far and deep, and a lot of connections. And one of the people that he had upset was a guy called Carlos Moura, who was the head of naval intelligence at the time. Had got his own estate, and people had been on holiday there and visited, and there'd been accidents, as you can imagine. So we'd been going back to Brazil, and one of my underlying fears was that some of the people that he'd gone against had federal weight. They had the police in the pockets and things like that. Well, anything can happen in São Paulo, anything can happen in Rio, anything can happen in Fortaleza. But the more you start going to the northeast, it's more like the last frontier. It's like the jungle on one side and the sea on the other. And if my thing is that if we got stopped and a corrupt policeman says they resisted arrest, so I shot them, who's going to say any different? Who's going to do any different? And that was always my fear there, is that we just lacked that real-time communication, and we lacked the process to log anything, or successfully log anything in the event of anything happening. So we were really, there was just me and him, and it just, so.
Would you say that was your scariest experience?
I think because we were there for 5 and 6 weeks at a time, and these are places where Brazil is not a place to act up. It's like Russia. You don't start playing up there, because you cannot come home. So we were in Brazil, and whilst they were great places, it is just a place where anything can happen, and frequently does. And you'll never just never hear about it,
We just watched Benedict not come home, didn't we?
Right.
The film, what was it called? The Courier. It's,
no, I don't know that.
A brilliant film.
Really, yeah.
About an English spy who heads over to Russia.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, so, definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely have a look at something like that. Yeah. So we were out there. Had a great time. Went all over. We took an holiday to Barbados, all paid for by the Russians, and they said, "Listen, get out there, Neil, and you're not here to be punished, so have an holiday yourself," and all that.
Oh wow,
and
that's the first.
Yeah, we went to Sandy Lane, and sort of like all laid on, and it was a great thing. Good thing.
What about the Maltese Falcon?
Speak to Jen / Sean.
Yeah. So that is a situation where
He's phrasing this one carefully.
Yeah. Someone came to me and said, "I know this guy." I said, "Oh yeah, I know this guy. He needs help. He's tagged, and he's going to get extradited back to Sweden." Okay, what's he done for to be extradited back to Sweden? He's sort of misappropriated sort of hundreds of millions out of the Swedish pension fund.
Oh shit!
So they were asking me if I could facilitate sort of getting him away from that extradition, So
I do remember the details of this actually.
What happened?
He told us at dinner, but I think for in the interest of national security, we cannot elaborate.
So anyway, I had to refuse, and
you did, yeah. I remember now.
I had to refuse and say I can't help you on that one.
That was hardcore.
Yeah.
Oh, shame.
Yeah.
Shame the viewers
And
will
then
never experience this.
meeting Big Joe Egan.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was staying in an hotel in Doncaster, and it's a place where a lot of boxers had been previously, just tons and tons of world champions. And there's a guy in Doncaster, an ex-professional rugby player called Andy Booker, who had that connection with Mike Tyson, so on and so forth. Tons of boxers, anybody. Joe Calzaghe had been there. Anthony Joshua had been there. Although I have met Anthony Joshua because I trained at his gym in London, BXR on Chiltern Street. So I met him before.
What's he like?
He was a nice guy. He just won world title a week before from Klitschko, and he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He or he beat Klitschko the week before, but I met him. He was a nice guy, come up shaking hands. But then again, you see, I was in his gym, and it's an extortionate amount of money to be membership, and I'm sure he thought that I'd paid, but I hadn't. I was there with one of these guys who the Russians were paying for. So that's so that's how I was there. But he come up shaking hands anyway. Very nice fella. But I'd met Tim Witherspoon, former 2-time world heavyweight champion, at this hotel. Trained with him, and the guy who has the hotel had said to me, look, Joe Egan's here, this, that and the other. I've told him about you, and you should introduce yourself if you see him about, because he'd like to meet you. So that's more or less what happened. Joe was in the gym I went down to train, he was already there, and he introduced me, I've heard all about you, and obviously I've heard all about him type thing. And we just got on famously.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, fantastic guy. And, he was just... and so much so that's how come I met you, Sean and Jen. So,
all the privilege is ours.
And check out the podcast we did with Big Joe Egan, from Mike Tyson to Michael Francese's stories, and also check out his book, which we have published for him, Big Joe Egan, the toughest white man on the planet, as described by Mike Tyson.
and I suspect he is as well.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. He's in Man Mountain, So yeah, great guy.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, out of everything you've been through in your entire life,
firstly, who's the favourite that you've looked after?
Probably the guy for the Russians. I had a good carry on with him. He was demanding at times. He was challenging at times, but we had a good carry on. You know what I mean? And he'd got a few quid. And he wasn't shy about looking after me with it, I mean, great aftershaves, but bought me great shoes.
Treats you like a princess.
But he tried to palm me off with some Versace stuff that clearly not me. And I had to say no, thank you. But great guy.
Closest to death moment.
Probably in Baghdad, somewhere along the line. I lived in an hotel called the Alhambra. It was used as basically as the line for the mortars from Al Qaeda. So any drop shot or anything like that with a mortar, or and there were plenty of attacks and things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's been quite a few, to be fair. It's so I won't be able to pick one, but there's quite a few along the way.
Is it going off all throughout the night? You can hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did you just not sleep under those conditions?
No, I mean. One night there was sort of some firefight, and we went out onto the balcony, and the rounds were whizzing past literally on the balcony. So it's like, so yeah, it's just a bit day in, day out, and you're a bit like, it's like when you used to do 2 months on, 1 month off, and when you came home for that month, it'd take like sort of a week to settle down. And then the last week would be getting yourself geared up mentally and physically to go back. So there really was only ever 2 weeks off, if you know what I mean. But yeah, a lot of situations that I've been through,
Wow.
And you're going to get a book out about your life?
Hint.
That depends if you're going to write it for me, Sean. If you're going to write it for me, the answer is yes.
We will publish it, but we've got to figure out a way it's going to get written.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave that in you and Jen's capable hands. Yeah.
In conclusion, Neil, is there anything you'd like to say to the viewers?
I'd just like to say, I hope it's been entertaining for you, and thanks ever so much for listening.
Yeah, it was really well structured, just going from all these hot spots of the world, basically, wasn't it?
I'm sure we've got many more.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Held a few
Yeah.
back
We can always. There's always plenty more to put in. I just thought I'd give you the bare bones, So we can always. Yeah.
So let us know in the comments what you thought of today's video. If you fancy some organic cotton clothing, Boomer and Jen. Links in description box.
Come give us a hug.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Oh, absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Fantastic, Neil.
Cheers,
You're a
buddy.
natural speaker.
Cheers, Sean.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you.